A single gunshot echoed across the vast expanse of the Wyoming Territory as Quentin Gallagher crouched low against the rugged terrain, his keen eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The year was 1876, and the merciless sun of late June beat down upon the prairie with an unforgiving intensity that made even the most seasoned frontiersman wince. Quentin, at 28 years of age, had seen more than his fair share of hardship since the war ended, but something about the silence that followed that gunshot made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He adjusted his worn leather hat, pulling it lower to shield his eyes from the blinding sun as he guided his chestnut mare, Penny, toward the direction of the sound. The rolling hills of sagebrush and prairie grass undulated before him, creating a sea of golden waves that concealed whatever lay beyond. His weathered hand rested instinctively on the Colt revolver at his hip, a habit born from years of vigilance in a land where the law was often just a distant concept. "Easy, girl," he whispered to Penny as her ears twitched nervously. "Let's go see what trouble's brewing." Quentin had been trailing a small herd of mustangs for the better part of 2 days, hoping to add to his modest ranch's stock. The gunshot had likely scattered them to the winds, but something told him that whatever waited beyond that ridge was far more important than a few wild horses. As he crested the hill, the sight below made him draw a sharp breath. A covered wagon sat awkwardly tilted to one side, its left rear wheel splintered beyond repair. The canvas covering had been torn in several places, and personal belongings were scattered across the ground as if someone had ransacked the vehicle in haste. But it was the 3 bodies lying motionless in the dirt that caused Quentin to spur Penny forward at a gallop. He approached cautiously, revolver now drawn and ready. The first body belonged to a man, perhaps in his 50s, with a neat bullet hole through his chest. Nearby lay another man, younger, dressed similarly in the practical attire of pioneers. The third was that of a boy who couldn't have been more than 16, his youthful face frozen in an expression of terror. All 3 bore the unmistakable signs of a brutal ambush, an all too common occurrence on the frontier. "Damn it all to hell," Quentin muttered, noting the fresh tracks that led away from the scene. The attack couldn't have happened more than an hour ago. A faint noise from inside the wagon caught his attention, a whimper so soft it might have been the wind. Quentin approached carefully, his boots crunching on the scattered belongings that told the story of a family seeking a new life in the West. "Hello," he called, keeping his voice low and as unthreatening as possible. "Anyone alive in there?" The whimpering stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense silence. Quentin reached the back of the wagon and peered inside. At first he saw only darkness, but as his eyes adjusted, he made out a figure huddled in the farthest corner, wrapped in what appeared to be a quilt. Wide, terrified eyes stared back at him from a dirt-smudged face. "I won't hurt you," he said gently, holstering his weapon to show he meant no harm. "The danger's past." Slowly, a young woman emerged from beneath the quilt, her chestnut hair falling in disheveled waves around her tear-streaked face. Her dress, once a cheerful blue calico, was now stained with dust and what Quentin suspected was blood. She couldn't have been older than 23. "Are they gone?" She whispered, her voice hoarse with fear. Quentin nodded, offering his hand to help her from the wagon. "They're gone. You're safe now," he whispered, the words coming naturally as he took in her trembling form. She hesitated for only a moment before placing her delicate hand in his calloused one. As she stepped into the sunlight, her legs buckled beneath her, and Quentin caught her with practiced ease. "My family." She began, but her voice broke as her gaze fell upon the bodies lying in the dirt. "I'm sorry," was all Quentin could offer, knowing no words could possibly comfort her in that moment. "My name is Nora," she said after a long pause, her voice gaining strength despite the circumstances. "Nora Morrison, that's my father, my brother, and my cousin." Each word seemed to cost her dearly, but she stood straighter as she spoke, as if determined not to collapse under the weight of her grief. "Quentin Gallagher," he replied, still supporting her weight. "My ranch is about half a day's ride from here." We can't stay, those bandits might come back and we need to. He trailed off, not wanting to speak the harsh reality that the bodies would need proper burial. Nora nodded, understanding what remained unsaid. I need to gather some things, she said, turning back toward the wagon. Quentin helped her collect what little the bandits had left behind: a small trunk containing clothes, a family Bible, and a locket bearing a miniature portrait of a woman who shared Nora's delicate features and determined gaze. He watched as she knelt beside each of her fallen family members, whispering private goodbyes and gently closing their eyes. They worked in somber silence to dig 3 graves on a small rise overlooking the prairie. It was backbreaking work in the summer heat, but Quentin didn't complain, and neither did Nora, who insisted on helping despite her obvious exhaustion. When the last shovelful of earth had been placed and Nora had read passages from the family Bible, they gathered the remaining belongings and prepared to leave. Where were you headed? Quentin asked as he secured her trunk to Penny's saddle. Silver Creek, Nora replied, looking out at the endless prairie. My father heard there was good land available for homesteading. We left Missouri 2 months ago. Her voice was flat, drained of emotion. I suppose that doesn't matter now. Quentin helped her onto Penny's back before mounting behind her. Silver Creek is about 3 days' ride from my place. Once you've rested, I can take you there if that's still your wish. Nora said nothing, her body rigid in his arms as they rode away from the graves of her family. Quentin didn't press her for a response. He'd seen enough grief in his time to know that some wounds needed silence to begin healing. They rode until dusk, stopping only when the light became too dim to safely continue. Quentin made camp in a small grove of cottonwoods near a creek, helping Nora down from the saddle with gentle hands. She moved like someone in a dream, following his instructions mechanically as they set up a simple camp. As the fire crackled between them and the stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky, Quentin offered her jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. She accepted with murmured thanks but ate little, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. They came out of nowhere, she said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for hours. We'd stopped to fix the wheel. It had been giving us trouble for days. My father was underneath the wagon, trying to secure it when they rode up. She shuddered. 6 of them. They wanted our money, our supplies, everything. Quentin listened, knowing she needed to speak the horror aloud to begin processing it. My brother James tried to reason with them, but they were drunk, I think, when my cousin reached for his gun. Her voice faltered. It happened so fast. I crawled under the wagon and then inside when they weren't looking. I thought they'd find me for sure, but they were too busy taking what they wanted. Then they argued among themselves and rode off. Raiders, Quentin said grimly. The territory's crawling with them since the gold strikes up north. Deserters, outlaws, men who never fit back into society after the war. He poked at the fire with a stick. I'm sorry you encountered them. Nora looked up at him, truly seeing him for the first time. And what about you, Mr. Gallagher? Where do you fit in this wild country? Quentin offered a small smile. Just trying to carve out a little piece for myself, Miss Morrison. Got a small spread about 10 miles south of Pine Ridge, nothing fancy, but it's mine. He paused. And it's Quentin, please. Out here formalities seem rather pointless. Quentin, she repeated softly. Then you must call me Nora. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small against the vastness of the night. I don't know what I'm going to do. All our money was in my father's belt. The deed to the land we were claiming was in his coat pocket. It's all gone. Let's not worry about that tonight, Quentin said gently. You're alive, and that's what matters. Tomorrow we'll ride to my ranch and you can rest properly. Then we'll figure things out. She nodded, a single tear escaping down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. Quentin pretended not to notice, giving her the dignity of her private grief. When they finally lay down to sleep, Quentin gave Nora his bedroll and positioned himself on the opposite side of the fire, his revolver within easy reach. He watched as exhaustion finally claimed her, her breathing becoming deep and even. Only then did he allow himself to relax slightly, though his ears remained attuned to every sound in the darkness surrounding them. The morning brought a different kind of silence from Nora. She was pale but composed, accepting the coffee Quentin brewed with quiet gratitude. There was a new resolve in her eyes, a determination that hadn't been there the night before. They rode for several hours, the landscape gradually changing from open prairie to rolling foothills dotted with pine and aspen. By mid-afternoon, the first glimpse of Quentin's ranch came into view, a modest cabin with a barn and corral nestled in a protected valley with a clear creek running through it. "It's beautiful," Nora said, and Quentin felt an unexpected surge of pride at her words. "It's not much, but it's peaceful," he replied as they approached the cabin. "Built it myself after staking my claim 3 years ago." A large dog with shaggy gray fur came bounding to meet them, barking excitedly as they dismounted. "That's Sarge," Quentin said as the dog circled them, tail wagging furiously. "Don't worry, he's all noise and no bite." Nora reached out hesitantly to pat the dog's head, a ghost of a smile crossing her face as he leaned into her touch. It was the first smile Quentin had seen from her, and something in his chest tightened at the sight. The inside of the cabin was simple but tidy, one main room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. A small lean-to addition served as a pantry and storage area. Everything spoke of a solitary but orderly existence. "You'll take the bed," Quentin said, setting her trunk down. "I'll sleep in the barn until we figure out your next steps." Nora looked around, suddenly seeming uncomfortable. "I can't put you out of your own home. Perhaps I should continue to Silver Creek tomorrow." "And do what when you get there?" Quentin asked gently. "Without the deed or money, the land office won't help you. Winter will be here before you know it, and you'd be facing it alone without supplies or shelter." The truth of his words hung heavy in the air between them. Nora sank onto one of the wooden chairs, the reality of her situation finally breaking through the shock that had sustained her. "What am I to do?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Quentin busied himself lighting a fire in the hearth, giving her space to process her thoughts. "For now, you rest," he said finally. "You've been through an ordeal no one should have to face. Everything else can wait a day or two." He left her alone in the cabin while he tended to Penny and the other horses in the corral. By the time he returned with fresh game for their supper, Nora had washed the dust from her face and changed into a clean dress. Her hair was neatly braided, and though her eyes still held immeasurable sadness, she had regained some composure. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the pot of beans she had set to warm over the fire. "I found them in your pantry and thought I might make myself useful." Quentin smiled. "Not at all. Been a while since I had a proper meal, usually just throw something together after a long day's work." They fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine as they prepared the evening meal together. Quentin skinned and cleaned the rabbit he'd shot, while Nora mixed cornmeal for bread. There was something soothing in the domestic simplicity of it all, a momentary respite from the tragedy that had brought them together. As they ate, Quentin told her about his life, how he'd fought for the Union during the war, drifted west afterward, unable to settle back into civilian life in his native Pennsylvania, and eventually found this valley that reminded him enough of home to put down roots. "And you've been here alone all this time?" Nora asked, studying him with newfound interest. Quentin nodded. "Had a partner for a while, fellow named Thaddeus, who helped me build the place. He caught gold fever last year and headed to the Black Hills. Haven't heard from him since." He took a sip of coffee. "Gets lonely sometimes, but I've got Sarge and the work keeps me busy." "What kind of work?" Nora seemed genuinely curious, and Quentin realized she was using the conversation to keep her mind from darker thoughts. "Raising horses mostly. Got a small herd, about 20 head. Break and train them, then sell them to the army at Fort Laramie or to settlers passing through." He shrugged. "It's enough to keep food on the table and a roof over my head." When night fell, Quentin gathered his blanket despite Nora's protests that she should be the one to sleep in the barn. "I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count," he assured her. "One more won't hurt me. Get some rest, Nora. Things will seem clearer in the morning." But as he settled into the hay loft, listening to the soft nickering of the horses below, Quentin found himself unable to sleep. The image of Nora's face kept appearing in his mind, her strength in the face of unimaginable loss, the quiet dignity with which she carried her grief. He hadn't allowed himself to grow close to anyone in years, finding safety in solitude. Yet somehow this woman had awakened feelings he'd thought long buried. The next morning, Quentin woke at dawn as usual and went about his chores, checking on his small herd in the south pasture before returning to the cabin. He found Nora already awake, her sleeves rolled up as she swept the wooden floor. "You don't need to do that," he said, feeling oddly embarrassed at the sight of her cleaning his home. "I need to keep busy," she replied simply. Idle hands leave too much room for thinking, Quentin understood. He'd thrown himself into building this ranch for similar reasons. After the war, physical labor was sometimes the only escape from memories too painful to confront. "Well, if you're determined to work, I could use help with the garden," he offered. "Been neglecting it with everything else that needs doing." The garden was a small plot behind the cabin, overgrown with weeds competing with stunted vegetables. Nora attacked it with surprising vigor, seemingly grateful for the demanding physical task. They worked side by side through the morning, pulling weeds, turning soil, and salvaging what crops they could. "You know about plants," Quentin observed as Nora expertly trimmed back a tomato vine. She nodded. "My mother taught me." She always said a good garden was worth more than gold to a family trying to make it through the winter. A shadow passed over her face. "She died of fever 2 years ago. That's when my father decided we should go west, said there was nothing left for us in Missouri." Quentin wanted to reach out to offer some comfort, but he kept his distance, respecting the fragile composure she was struggling to maintain. Instead, he said, "She taught you well. This is the best this garden's looked since I planted it." The simple compliment earned him another of those rare smiles that seemed to brighten the air around them. Days slipped into a week and a week into 2. They fell into an easy rhythm together, Quentin tending the horses and hunting, while Nora kept the cabin and garden. They spoke little of the future, both seemingly content to exist in this suspended present where expectations and decisions could be momentarily set aside. But reality couldn't be postponed forever. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Quentin finally broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "Winter will be here in a few months," he said carefully. "We should talk about what you plan to do, Nora." She was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "I have an aunt in Denver who might take me in, though I haven't seen her since I was a child. Or I could try to find work in one of the larger settlements, perhaps as a teacher or seamstress." Neither option seemed to bring her any enthusiasm, and Quentin felt a tightness in his chest at the thought of her leaving. These past weeks had changed something fundamental within him. The solitude he had once cherished now seemed hollow at the prospect of returning to it. "There's another possibility," he said, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain she could hear it. "You could stay here." Nora turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. "Stay here? As what, Mr. Gallagher? Your housekeeper?" The formal address stung after the easy familiarity they had established, but Quentin pressed on. "No, as my wife, if you'd consider it." The words hung between them, weightier than he'd anticipated. Nora's eyes widened, and for a terrible moment he thought he'd gravely misread their situation. "I know it's sudden," he continued hastily. "And I know your heart is still healing from all you've lost. I'm not asking for love, Nora. Just a partnership. 2 people facing the wilderness together instead of alone. In time, perhaps." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Nora stood and walked to the edge of the porch, her back to him as she gazed out at the land. The silence stretched until Quentin was certain he'd ruined everything. "My father always said that out west, practicality often trumps romance," she finally said, her voice soft but steady. "That marriages here are built on need as much as affection." She turned to face him. "Is that what you're proposing, Quentin? A practical arrangement?" He stood, crossing the space between them in 2 strides. "No," he said firmly. "I'm proposing something that started as practical but has become much more to me." He took a deep breath. I care for you, Nora. More than I expected to, more than I thought myself capable of after all these years alone. I'm not a poetic man, I can't offer pretty words or grand gestures, but I can offer you this home, my protection, and my promise to be a good husband. Nora studied his face in the twilight, searching for something. Whatever she saw there made her features soften. I've grown fond of this place, she admitted. And of you, but marriage is a serious commitment, especially out here where divorce is nearly impossible. I don't take it lightly, Quentin assured her. Think on it, there's no rush to decide. But Nora surprised him by reaching out to take his hand, her touch sending warmth through his entire body. I don't need to think, she said quietly. You saved my life, Quentin. You showed me kindness when I had nothing and no one. That's a foundation we can build upon. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was honest, and Quentin appreciated that more than empty sentiments. Is that a yes? He asked, hardly daring to believe. Nora's smile was small but genuine. Yes, Quentin Gallagher, I will marry you. He wanted to kiss her then but hesitated, unsure if such intimacy would be welcomed. Nora made the decision for him, rising on her tiptoes to press her lips gently against his. It was a brief, chaste kiss, but it sealed their agreement more effectively than any words could have. The nearest town with a preacher was Pine Ridge, a full day's ride from the ranch. They made the journey 2 days later, Nora riding her own horse, a gentle mare named Willow that Quentin had been training. The settlement was small but growing, with a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and the recently built church where Reverend Thomas welcomed them with surprised delight. A wedding, here in Pine Ridge, why this is a cause for celebration, the enthusiastic young minister declared. We've had precious few joyous occasions since I arrived last spring. Word spread quickly through the small community, and by the time the ceremony began that afternoon, the tiny church was filled with curious townsfolk eager to witness the union of the solitary rancher they'd occasionally glimpsed on supply runs and his mysterious bride. Nora wore her best dress, a deep green with lace at the collar, and had woven wildflowers into her hair. Quentin had shaved and donned a clean shirt and his only proper coat, feeling uncomfortably formal but determined to honor the occasion properly. The ceremony was simple and brief, but as they exchanged vows beneath the church's rough-hewn cross, Quentin was struck by the solemnity of the moment. This woman who had entered his life through tragedy was now binding her future to his. The responsibility of it humbled him. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Thomas declared with genuine enthusiasm. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Gallagher. This kiss was different from their first, still gentle but lingering, a promise of the life they would build together. When they separated, Quentin was surprised to see tears shimmering in Nora's eyes. Happy tears, she whispered, answering his unspoken question. My father would be glad to know I'm not facing the future alone. The townspeople insisted on a small celebration at the saloon, which had been hastily decorated with paper streamers. Mrs. Holloway, the shopkeeper's wife, had even baked a cake with precious sugar from her personal stores. It was a kindness neither Quentin nor Nora had expected, and it touched them both deeply. As they prepared to leave for the journey home, the town's blacksmith approached with an unexpected wedding gift, a new sign for their ranch. Never had a proper name, did it? He asked with a grin, presenting the wooden plaque on which he'd burned Gallagher Ranch in bold letters. No, it didn't, Quentin admitted, running his fingers over the letters. Thank you, Porter, this means a great deal. They rode home in the golden light of late afternoon, the new sign tied securely to Quentin's saddle. Neither spoke much, both contemplating the magnitude of the step they had taken. As they approached the cabin, their home now, Quentin dismounted first, then surprised Nora by lifting her from the saddle and carrying her across the threshold. I believe that's traditional, he said with a slight blush as he set her gently on her feet. Nora laughed, a sound Quentin realized he'd rarely heard from her. Yes, but I didn't expect you to be a man who cared for tradition. Some traditions have their merits, he replied with a smile. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered new aspects of each other that had remained hidden behind the barriers of propriety. Quentin was gentle and patient, mindful of Nora's inexperience and the emotional journey she was still navigating. For her part, Nora approached their union with the same quiet courage she had shown in facing her loss, her trust in him evident in every touch. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Quentin felt a contentment he'd never known before. The emptiness that had been his constant companion since the war had been filled by this woman who had come into his life so unexpectedly. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "After all I saw in the war, all the death and destruction, I convinced myself I didn't deserve peace or happiness." Nora propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "And now," Quentin reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Now I think perhaps we've both been given a second chance. My solitude for your loss neither was a fair trade, but together maybe we can build something worthwhile from what remains." She pressed her lips to his forehead, a gesture of such tenderness it nearly undid him. "I think we already have," she murmured. The seasons turned, summer yielding to autumn with its vibrant colors and crisp mornings. Quentin and Nora worked side by side to prepare for the coming winter, harvesting the now thriving garden, smoking meat, and ensuring the barn was properly sealed against the coming snow. They made one more trip to Pine Ridge before the weather turned, purchasing supplies and sending letters to inform what remained of their families about their marriage. Nora wrote to her aunt in Denver, explaining her new circumstances and inviting her to visit when travel became easier in the spring. As they rode home with their laden packhorse, Quentin noticed Nora seemed unusually quiet, her face thoughtful as they traversed the now familiar trail. "Something troubling you?" he asked, concerned by her silence. She shook her head. "Not troubling exactly, just uncertain how you'll feel about some news I received in town." Quentin reined in his horse, suddenly alert. "What news?" Nora stopped beside him, a mixture of anxiety and hope in her expression. "Mrs. Holloway confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now." She took a deep breath. "I'm with child, Quentin. We're going to have a baby come spring." For a moment, Quentin could only stare at her, processing her words. Then a grin spread across his face, so wide his cheeks ached with it. "A baby," he repeated, as if saying it aloud might make it more real. "You're certain?" Nora nodded, relief washing over her features at his obvious joy. "As certain as one can be. Mrs. Holloway has delivered every baby in Pine Ridge for the past 10 years. She says all the signs are there." In one fluid movement, Quentin dismounted and lifted Nora from her saddle, spinning her in a circle as she laughed and protested. "Careful. You'll upset the horses." He set her down but kept his arms around her, his expression suddenly serious. "I love you, Nora Gallagher. I should have said it before now, but I was afraid it was too soon, that you might not feel the same." Nora's eyes widened at his declaration, and for a moment Quentin feared he had overstepped. But then she reached up to cup his face between her hands, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "I love you too," she said simply. "I think I have since you whispered you're safe now in that terrible moment when I thought my life was over. You gave me hope when I had none, and now you've given me a future I never imagined." They stood together on the trail, foreheads touching, sharing breath and promises in the golden autumn light. The winds of winter would come, but they would face them together, no longer two solitary souls adrift in the vastness of the frontier, but a family taking root in the wilderness they had both come to love. The baby, a healthy boy they named James after Nora's brother, arrived with the first wildflowers of spring. As Quentin held his son for the first time, marveling at the perfection of his tiny fingers and the surprising strength of his grip, he thought about the strange, winding path that had led to this moment. A chance gunshot heard across the prairie. A devastated woman found hiding in a ransacked wagon. A whispered promise of safety that had somehow blossomed into a love neither of them had been looking for. "Look at what we've made," Nora said softly from where she rested on their bed, her face tired but radiant with joy. From so much loss, something so precious. Quentin placed their son in her arms and sat beside them, his family complete in a way he had never dared to dream possible. Outside, the land was awakening from its winter slumber, promising new growth and possibilities. Inside, in this simple cabin that had once known only solitude, life had taken root and flourished against all odds. "You're safe now," Quentin whispered, echoing the words that had begun their journey together. "All of you, always." And as Nora smiled up at him, their son nestled securely between them, he knew it was a promise he would spend the rest of his life keeping.